Parents on Reddit, what was your I raised an idiot moment? I used to tell my kids not to take off their shoes and socks in the car, especially on short trips. Just leave them on so that we don't have to spend 5 minutes finding and putting them back on before we run into the store. Imagine a single dad with 2 young kids running around the car trying to reshoe my children in the grocery store parking lot in the middle of an Arizona summer. Yuck. One day we went to the store and my daughter was missing her shoe. It was nowhere to be found. Daddy, I didn't want you to be mad that my shoe was off, so I threw it out the window. Made sense to a 5-year-old, I guess. My dad's moment was when I made him drive around with me because my car had been making a thunk noise every time I made a turn. After 15 minutes he announced it was the baseball bat in my trunk rolling around. Edit. My revenge 20 years later was helping him figure out the rattle in his car. It was his sunglasses he put in his built-in sunglass holder. I asked my kids what the biggest dinosaur was, and my oldest 15Y/O male said paleontologist without skipping a beat. That's when I knew I was in trouble. Then my friend told my 10-year-old that the dirt on the car tasted like candy, so he licked it. He tried to get his 6-year-old brother to do it, but even he wasn't falling for it. At least 3 out of 5 kids will move out of my house eventually. Edit. Clarification on 15 meters to express 15 male. When my son was 11 years old, he confidently informed me he was pretty sure he knew everything there was to know, because he tried to think of something that he didn't know and couldn't think of anything. My 18-year-old son was told to get an HIV test in college for extra credit and later came home and told me he got HIV. I was confused. He didn't say he was tested, he said. Mom, I got HIV today. He was serious, and I thought he was joking or something. I was confused until his twin sister said, "No, stupid, we got an HIV test." I really didn't know what to think. When my youngest son, who was 10 at the time, was getting his ears checked at the pediatrician, and they found a foreign object in his left ear. Said object was a dead housefly, because he thought sticking a fly in his ear would give him flying powers. He had caught it and shoved it in there alive about a week prior. Daughter calls me there is a cop behind me with his lights on. What should I do? Well, was she actually taught to pull over? I've known people whose parents never actually taught them what to do with a cop behind them, and I know people who are terrified of the police being pulled over and panic hard. If you're 16 over 17, I can absolutely see becoming terrified and not knowing exactly what to do. It's intimidating to the extreme. I'm the idiot kid, but when I was about 3, after preparing dinner, my mom would leave me alone in the kitchen after I finished. I would search for some M&Ms to nibble at, knowing I wasn't allowed. Every time after I finished, I would go over to my mom and ask her, "Did you hear me eating M&Ms in the kitchen?" She would always reply yes, and I would always get so frustrated because every time I tried to be as stealthy as possible, I never realized what blew my cover until I grew older. When I was little and my mom would come in to check on me sleeping, before she went to bed I would pretend to be asleep to see if I could fool her. It never worked, and she'd say, "I know you're awake," and I would be like, "How?" and be really disappointed. I think I was a teenager when I remembered this and realized that she was probably just saying that every time and I would only hear it if I was actually awake. When the Peter Pan peanut butter recall happened 10 to 12 years ago or so due to salmonella, my then 15-year-old daughter came in from school, and as she was walking past the living room TV was on, she stopped and watched the news report about the salmonella outbreak. She got this aha light bulb moment and said, "Oh, now I get it. It's about peanut butter." All day at school I kept hearing Peter Pan was killing people around the country, and I thought he had turned bad or something and was now villain. I just stared at her waiting for her to say she was joking and didn't really think Peter Pan was real. But no, she just went upstairs to her room like we just had a normal conversation about normal, everyday events. When we had to take down our shed and my son took a chainsaw to the support posts from the inside. Fortunately, his brothers are not idiots and they stopped him. He knew there was a frozen pizza in the garage, but couldn't find it. Didn't even think to check the freezer. Asked my mom, She said when we were at a business picnic in the park and someone turned to me and said, "Hey Pam, is that your son naked on the slide?" Not my story, but my granddad's from a few decades ago. One day when my uncle was about 10, he heard from somewhere that babies float, and for whatever reason this really interested him. Like 3 days later, my granddad was reading the newspaper in their living room, and he hears my uncle yelling out, "Dad, Dad, Dad," from the backyard. My granddad walks out and sees my uncle standing right beside their pool, holding my aunt who was about 1 year old at the time, and was also in her crib about 15 minutes before. The thought of my 10-year-old uncle picking his baby sister out of her crib to do this cracks my family up. Immediately my uncle then shouts, "Dad, did you know babies float?" and proceeds to toss my 1-year-old aunt into the swimming pool. My aunt started to sink, and my granddad had to sprint over to the pool and jump in before she drowned. That day, my uncle learned that babies do not float. Told my kid that carrots help you see in the dark. He then went into the basement with a carrot and started waving it around like a flashlight. I know that you were just trying to get him to eat his carrots, but the vision thing is a myth started by the British in WWII to explain why they kept spotting German planes without revealing that they'd invented radar. Sorry, sometimes I just need to ruin things for people. I was in the shower yesterday when my phone rang. I asked my 13-year-old to answer it. He says "Shh" in the shower. Then silence. I asked him to take a message and he responds, "How do I do that?" I had to explain how to write I note on a piece of paper. When my son was disappointed by 6th ed class, he thought they were going to learn some moves. My mother called me in tears from laughing and told me that my sister 5 years younger than me, probably 16 at this time, had just asked her, "I know this might be a silly question, but what's bratted?" My mom is like, "My sister thought that the brought to you by message when watching TV was bratted, one word, and she had wondered about it for her whole life pretty much." A few weeks ago my son decided to use the lip of the tub to walk on while he was taking a shower. After he slipped the first time, he decided that he was going to be very careful when walking on the lip of the tub. From then on he was okay though. One day after school my brother and I met up with my dad. He worked at the school and the janitor, and began walking to the parking lot. We passed the elementary building and the janitor lets out a huge sign about some punk writing their name on the facade. My dad looks over and said, "It's the same name as my kid, but at least his name is spelled differently since it has a C in it." Loud gasped my brother. I forgot the C. He was not the sharpest tool in the shed. My dad loves to tell the story of him teaching me to tell time. I had just learned money, so a quarter was 25 to my small brain. After about an hour of trying to convince me that it was only 15 minutes in time, my mom walked in the kitchen to both of us crying out of frustration. Also my stepson is almost 2. He is tough as nails. Last night we were helping him do front flips. He would just put his head on the ground and we would flip his legs over his head. Apparently at some point, he thought he had it by himself and took off running just to jump and faceplant on the floor. He looked up at me, so proud of himself. I just said, "Good job buddy," and tried to deflect my laughter. Not a parent, but when I was 14 I thought the smell of gasoline was the same smell as natural gas, so I called up the gas department to check it out. They said it smelled like gasoline, not natural gas, and that's where I knew I was stupid. However, they checked out the house anyways and there was a small gas leak in the basement that required a $3,000 replacement of a water boiler. My 14 years old soon went into a dressing room to try on 5 pairs of pants. After waiting 15 minutes and yelling twice into the men's dressing room to see if it was okay, he admitted he could find the shorts he had worn in. He gave me 3 pairs of the pants and still couldn't find them. I finally had to go into the stall to look. They were balled up in the leg of one of the pair of pants. It was extremely noticeable. He swore he took his shorts off before trying on any of the pants, so he didn't think to look in them. I was speechless. He's in the gifted and talented program in our school district. I haven't, and I hope I don't have to. but my dad said almost exactly that line in reference to my brother. My dad told me about a conversation they had that went like this as best I remember. When his third child was born and looked nothing like him, I told him he should get a DNA test, and he told me he wished he could, but it was too late. I asked what he meant, and he said by now all the DNA would have mixed, and there would be no way to tell who the child's father was. After I explained how DNA works to him, he still didn't believe me. When I asked him why he wouldn't just try on the off chance I was right, that rather than being on the hook for child support for a child he had literally seen for 12 hours total over the first year of its life, he said it's just 21 more years anyhow, why waste my time? My 13-year-old son was sniffing really hard and moving his head all around the area he was standing in. Slightly concerned he had lost his mind, I asked him what he was doing. He told me, I farted. I'm trying to smell it all up, so you don't have to smell it. He's a thoughtful idiot. Definitely not an idiot, but I love this story about my kid. I used to pay the guy who took care of the yard for me by writing a check, putting it in a baggie, and sticking it under the mat. One weekend I was on the phone while writing the check, so I asked my son to put the check in the baggie under the mat for me. I went on with the conversation and forgot about it. A few days later, the guy who takes care of the lawn calls me up and says he looked everywhere but can't find the check. While we are talking, I open the door and lift up the mat, and no check. He says, "You are really great customers." So I was surprised that the check wasn't there. I was surprised too. I look around, behind bushes, under a decoration, no check. Then, I try to think like my son. I look under the mat inside the front door, and there's the check. We still laugh about it. I heard a noise in my kitchen, and I went in there and there was flour all over the floor and all over my kid. And he was like, not me, but I think it probably was him. My brother couldn't remember the proper name for shoes, so he called them foot houses. Mum confirmed that day that at least one of her teenage children was a bit doughy up top. We need to leave. Sent him to put on socks. Waited more than enough. Go find him has in his room, wearing only underwear, playing with Legacy. Can't remember what I sent him after Reddit. I was away and didn't expect this much attention. Since people are asking, I think he was about 8 at the time. I can definitely imagine him repeatedly getting distracted by toys, then guessing what he was supposed to do. Oh yeah, changed shirt. Take that off. Oh hey Legacy. It's not anything that I'd have medicated, and he has improved. He still couldn't find his, but with a bell on it, but I suppose he'll grow out of that too. When they mistook a leaky radiator hose for smoke, no problem, it kind of looks the same. They continued to drive the car home thinking it was on fire. Pulled it into the garage that is attached to the house. My dad and I were driving a lawnmower we just got, and it was running pretty hot and very loud, and he said nothing was wrong. There was a little smoke coming from the back of it, so he says whatever, and parks it in our barn. It caught fire about 2 minutes after we parked it and walked away, almost completely burnt down the barn. Here's a surgeon. My cousin got busted with weed at school in her locker. When the cops came she said I wasn't going to smoke it, I just sell it facepalm. I'm the idiot. I registered for college and spelled my middle name wrong, but didn't notice for 4 years, since they always abbreviated to my initial. I was showing my parents my diploma before walking on graduation day and my mom just stared at me like I was special. Bonus points, I actually thought that was how it was spelled. A couple of weeks ago, our chihuahua was horny and trying to bone his sister. I said to husband that the dog reminded me of a frustrated teen lad and he needs a cold shower. 20 minutes later, 17 years old walks in holding a distraught and dripping dog wrapped in a towel. Head over head the conversation and literally put him in a cold shower in March in the UK. I swear to God, raising this kid is like painting by numbers, and every so often he goes dramatically over the lines. I don't think he's an idiot, but I think he lacks common sense, because he'll take a bite of food, it will be scalding hot. He'll cry and act like he's dying, but won't spit it out. He'll say, "Mommy, it's hot." And I'll say, "Well, I told you to wait for it to cool down, or then blow on it," or something to that effect. he will say no and then continue taking scalding hot bites and crying that it's too hot. In his defense, his father's the same way. I asked my mother to wait until the aisle was empty before telling her what bread I wanted in the store. We lived in a largely black populated area, and as a small white kid I was scared my preference for white bread would come off as racist. My son came to our house to visit. He didn't live with us. We weren't home, but we on our way home, so he let himself in. We walk in, and he's freaking out about breaking our newly adopted cat or something to that effect. I asked him what was she doing. She looked fine to me. He said she was vibrating when she sat on his lap. This is where he learned about cats purring. He hadn't been around a lot of cats, so IDK. Edit. I'm so glad others have experienced this. He is definitely not an idiot, but some of the things he comes up with has us shaking our head. Not my kid, but my aunt gave my mom this look when we found out my 12-year-old cousin thought Germany was on the other side of the world. As an Austrian, skim reading this and thought Australia basically is on the other side of the world to Germany. I sent it, then read it again. Oops. My dad is a truck driver, so I was the adult male figure in my kid's sister's life. One day when she was around 14 or so, I took her to McDonald's for dinner and I asked her what she wanted, and she said McNuggets. I pull up to the speaker and start ordering. Hello, it'll take an 8-piece McNuggets with a high C. My sister quickly reminds me, tell them no onions. It'll also take a quarter-pounder meal with a Sprite. Sister again says no onions. The cashier asked, will that complete your order? Sister getting mad, says no onions. Yes, that will be all, I say calmly, and I pull forward. My sister is getting really pissed and asked, why didn't you tell them no onions on mine? I look at her and say just as loudly, on your chicken nuggets. It dawned on her and she couldn't look up and show her face when I asked the cashier at the window to please make sure there are no onions on her order of McNuggets. I swear my oldest is not actually a dumbass. They were just having a bad day. A few months after they got their first car, they were in a very minor, no actual damage done, accident in a parking lot. They called me panicked. I told them to relax and exchange insurance information just in case. 10 minutes later I get another panicked call because now their car won't start. I calm them down, tell them to call roadside assistance and he'll come meet them at the parking lot. I get there just after the tow truck arrives. My oldest is nearly in tears over their car. I give them a hug and reassure them that it's probably something minor. There's simply no way the tiny fender bender they had could have caused any damage significant enough to disable the car. The tow truck driver hops out, takes one look at my kid's car and asks, did you put it in park, before trying to start it, while pointing out that some light was on. My kid goes back to their car and sure enough, in their panic over the earlier fender bender, realized they had turned off the car without putting it park. Thank goodness it was on a level surface. They hop in, throw it in park, and their car starts right up. Much to their relief, the tow truck driver and I have a hearty laugh. My daughter was a messy teenager who had to be told to clean her room. She had a habit of letting dishes pile up on her nightstand. We were on her ass constantly about not letting dishes, especially sports bottles of juice, sit around because they ferment. Well, one day the husband and I were in our bedroom and heard an explosion and our daughter scream. We ran to her room to find one of her bottles of juice had finally given in to the pressure of the fermented juice and literally blew to pieces. The explosion was so powerful the top left a hole in her ceiling and there were tiny pieces of sports bottle shrapnel everywhere. My smart one.